Welcome to this episode of ACG's Growth TV. I'm Carolyn Vallejo, digital editor for ACG's Media Group. Technology remains at the center of business transformation across virtually every industry today. So what do buyers and sellers interested in technology-focused deal-making need to know? Here with me to discuss this topic is Tricia Salinero, Managing Director and Head of Technology within Investment Banking at Stout. Tricia, considering this widespread interest in technology companies, but again, considering some of the fluctuations that you just mentioned, what do sellers need to know about the valuations of their own technology companies?
So to be thoughtful about what are the macro trends, certainly I think we're all sensitive to, what does the rest of 2022 look like? Within your industry, it's going to be important. I'll pick IT services, for example. A number of companies have utilized Eastern European IT outsourcing firms for their R&D efforts. And I do believe there's going to be some migration of that business over time. And so, thinking about what are the macro trends in your own industry, and then what are, coming down to your subsegment, what are the trends that are happening in terms of other exits? So what I try to tell sellers is, it's great to be the second, third, fifth company in your space that has an exit. It's not great to be the 15th. And, you'll see a bell curve of the valuations that are paid across those, across the multiples and across those exits. You'll see that first deal might have a reasonably high valuation. That second deal might even have a higher valuation. That 15th deal is been priced out and really won't see the yield from an exit perspective that the first couple will. So, being thoughtful about who else is your competitor. Are you watching them in the news? Have you seen a bunch of exits in that space? We're seeing a bunch of exits right now in the, consolidating around field services software, for example. We're seeing a bunch of exits consolidating around companies that are in the MSP space, the managed service provider space, and, whether that extends to managed security. That is also an area where we're seeing a lot of activity here over the last 6 months.
Tricia, you mentioned that sellers should be aware of macro trends. One of those macro trends that we are, of course, paying close attention to is the Great Resignation. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how things like talent retention strategy can impact those valuation discussions.
Sure, Carolyn. It's really interesting that we've seen such a migration of talent across all of these different companies. What I found is that having that spiritual leader within an organization, whether that's a salesperson who just really embraces how they talk to customers, or it's a technology person who really has the trust and the faith of the developers, those types of people really, sell in the conversations with buyers. And so if there's been a transition in those leadership positions, it's something to be thoughtful of, especially if it's within a window of, say, the last 6 to 12 months. There's not to say that you can't have that conversation and come up with a story around that, but the consistency of that story, I think, is going to be really important. And, as you move forward, you don't want to have that conversation and say, oh, our key developer left 6 months ago after a letter of intent, when that only the price, is going to be chipped away at with that type of revelation. So I think it's important to both have those conversations around retention, but also have those conversations with the buyer in particular around any leadership changes early on in the conversation.
Speaking of exits, can you talk a little bit about what the exit market looks like now that it seems everybody either is or wants to be a technology company? Are sellers looking to sell to other technology companies? Are they open to selling to other types of buyers?
Sure. So I think, traditionally, if you were a technology company coming up through the space, you sort of assumed that only another technology company would buy you. I think that, over the last 20 years, that's a lot of what I've seen. But certainly here over the last 2 years in particular, we are starting to see this uptick in companies that, traditionally haven't been thought of as technology companies. And whether that's someone like, an Accenture who comes out of, the services space, whether that's someone like McDonald's who bought a couple of companies in the tech space, or more traditional, companies like private equity, who would come in and, historically might not have paid as much as a strategic buyer. But here over the last 2 years in particular, they have competed quite well with strategic buyers. And so opening up that aperture a little bit to say, who else should be on the list. And I try to counsel, our clients to really look at a distribution of 4 or 5 different buckets of buyers and really have that list be dynamic. So maybe you might go out to an initial list that has these 5 buckets, but you see that resonance that's happening in one of them and, being able to deepen that list.